Taking down the Knights Templar, was that a lot different than taking down the Janissaries? I mean, there have been lots of historical precedent for what happened.
Indeed, I mean, the Roman Empire had the same problem with the Praetorian Guard.
Right.
Yeah,
well, of course, that's the obvious one. I was trying to look today rather than, we don't have a lot of Praetorian Guard. Well, who knows? Maybe in Washington we actually have some. It's hard to say. But, there was just so much to write about.
Well, that's the truth. I mean, having said how I sort of got to do it, I mean, what I have to say is it is such fun to do, because there is so much to write about, and there are so many ways of cutting the cake with this city, so many different ways of looking at Istanbul.
Well, there are, absolutely. I mean, you had that whole look at the Janissary and their stuff, their landscape, their history, and all in the Janissary tree. Now, when you move to the Snakestone, I found it really fascinating that you're looking to some degree at the city water, because there was a very well engineered water system for Istanbul. You can still see bits of the aqueduct and the cisterns. Many of them were there. In fact, there's a good restaurant under Topkapi called the Sarnik, which is in one old cistern.
Right.
And one of my favorite moments in the city, we were walking along and I had tried to get into a building that was closed, and some distinguished looking gentleman pointed out to me that it was closed for the day. And as we talked, it turned out he's a professor at the university or something, and I mentioned how interested I had been in seeing the Great Cistern. So he took us and led us off to a work in progress, which was the excavation and restoration of another major cistern. And what he said, which I still think about, it was the fact that Turkey, or Istanbul, has become a tourist economy, that all of a sudden there's money from the tourist trade or from potential work with the tourist trade to allow this cistern to be restored. Because what they do is they put inside them a coffee house, they've got a concert stage. See, the cistern becomes a kind of the way you Brits use cathedrals, I love going to concerts in cathedrals. And then I also thought again about Granada, where I can remember the tourist guide said just that it was not a city that attracted enough tourists to make possible the restoration and preservation of so many of its buildings, other than the Alhambra, where people go. So I think Istanbul is, because Turkey's become a very hot tourist spot. Cheap travel,
Well, it's cheap, but it's also, I mean, it has to be said, I think that visiting Istanbul is a great treat, because there are some fantastic, nice hotels, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg.
But it's not
people
just
are nice,
Istanbul.
the food is good, but that goes, and there's a lot to see.
What do they call it? The Turquoise Riviera. We were in Antalya the last time we were there, and that's a beautiful developing resort area. Some people go to, is it Cappadocia? Where they have all the weird,
extraordinary sort of cave dwellings and so on. It is an astonishing country.
It really is.
Well worth looking at.
So there you are in the Snakestone, and you've got a case that arises with the city's ancient watermen. And you've got the Valide Sultana has a much bigger role in this.
Yes, she does. She has
I really like her. What's sad, of course, is that her son is dying. And she must be, what, about 80?
She is, she's well into her 80s.
She's lived, for a woman of her time, a remarkably long time. And nobody quite knows what to do with her, because the court is essentially moved out and up the Bosporus and some of the... I've been to Dolcembace, but what is the palace that Mahmud is in?
Beşiktaş, which was a smaller palace, which was they built before they built Dolmabahce. But essentially it's a European palace. And this was all part of the reforming thing, and the sultans decided they wanted to live sort of, a la Franca, in the sort of French manner. So the Sultan, yes, as you say, the Sultan has moved out of Topkapi Palace, goes there perhaps for the odd sort of, ceremonial occasion. But his old mum is still there, because she's not going to move. She lives in the harem apartments, which are, for her, I think, they are full of the ghosts of the women of the empire. Over hundreds of years, and she feels in some ways she feels a sort of duty towards a responsibility for them. She's not going to, and she's a cussed old thing too. I mean, she's not going to go easily anywhere. So she's leading a much reduced life there, and I think she therefore enjoys her meetings with Yashim all the more when he comes to visit.
Right, and the fact that he is a eunuch allows him in, although
Yeah.
perhaps that whole bit about the eunuch is not quite as critical as it was when the Sultan lived there and there were lots of luscious wives.
Yeah, I think well, of course, she would have her sort of handmaidens and things. There are plenty of girls around the Valide. I mean, she wouldn't be.
She does, and they're in the book, and she
Yeah.
still has her. What were the black eunuchs? The black eunuchs, were they a kind of special group for the Sultana?
The black, well, it's the whole. I mean, the story of eunuchs is very strange and interesting, and it does go back thousands of years. Why eunuchs? Why did people make them? Was it just cruelty? No, I mean, it was there were reasons of state why people were made eunuchs and served in imperial entourages all through history, right the way back to Alexander the Great and beyond, actually. And I think essentially the reason was that these were people who could be trusted because in a sense, they had nowhere else to go. They weren't going to marry, then they weren't going to have kids. So they were never going to be putting some other private interest ahead of the interests of their own master. They had nothing else. There was nothing else available to them. So they became, in that sense, the perfect servants. And there was the side of the other side of things, which is of course that they couldn't impregnate anybody in the harem, and therefore there was no worry about whether anybody was illegitimate or whatever or not. And
But that was a hugely important thing when dynastic things decreed that royal bloodlines be preserved. I mean, if you look back at James II and the whole warming pan baby controversy, or controversy, as you would say, in English history, the fact that his queen did not give birth in public as she was supposed to, so there were always rumors that the baby was dead and they'd smuggled in some, some other woman's child, not a child of James II in a warming pan. It was really, it is, but I mean, it obviously mattered. China had eunuchs that looked after, as you say, and I think it was that way. There could be no question that children in the harem were in fact the children of whoever the ruler was, who had access to the women and could perform. But the eunuchs were there because there were a lot of functions that needed performing. As you say, they were a bridge. They could go.
They were the go-betweens.
Yeah, in and out. And, lots of them were involuntary. Maybe all of them were made eunuchs involuntary. Maybe most of them were captured. Sometimes they were sold, perhaps, by parents. Over in Venice, they had the castrati, the male sopranos going on, and those boys were sometimes sold by their families.
Yeah, well, the papal, the Pope had a choir of castrati. There was a papal choir.
Right, but what I'm saying is that those boys who went through that surgery, had been sold into it, not necessarily captured.
They didn't necessarily elect to do it themselves, have it done themselves. No, that's true. What's interesting about in a way, a further sort of kind of confirmation of what was needed is if you think that the only people who didn't use eunuchs in the medieval world, the Chinese, you say, did, the Mughal emperors of India did, the Ottomans did. The people who didn't were countries in Western Europe.
Right.
And that is because they had a celibate clergy. Priests couldn't and monks didn't marry. So the kings of Western Europe used those priests and monks to be their chancellors and so on. They were the people who ran the government. They could read. That was one thing.
I hadn't even thought about that.
But that's,
you're right.
Yeah.
Celibacy was key here, or whatever. So however you achieved a group.
The guys in Western Europe got a slightly better deal. There's many
well, they did.
Many a kind of randy prelate has been caught in flagrante.
Even some of the popes, in fact, were known to have children. Well, so here you are with the snake stone. You've got Nashim getting a second case. You've got Mahmud down up the Bosphorus. Up the Bosphorus dying. You've got his mum, trying to work out her end-of-life issues over here in Teukapi. You've got the Polish ambassador whose country
doesn't exist at the time.
Exactly, but he's still hanging on to his diplomatic post. It's a marvelous mix. And I can see you had a terrific time with it.
It is really good fun.